Today I'm going to start on Learn CSS course. So the first module is syntax and selectors, and the first lesson is setup and syntax. Intro to CSS. While HTML is the fundamental structure of every web page, it can be visually unappealing on its own. Cascading Style Sheet, or CSS, is a language web developers use to style the HTML content on a web page. If you're interested in modifying color, font types, font size, image, element, positioning, and more, CSS is the tool for the job. In this lesson, you'll learn how to set up your CSS file structure and select which HTML elements you wish to style. Take a look at the code in index.html and observe how it displays in the browser to the right. This is plain HTML without any styling. Let's take a look at the power of CSS. Copy and paste the following line code into line 5. So this is the page with only HTML. And on line 5, I'm going to paste this and run. So basically what that did was connect to this file with all these properties. CSS anatomy. The diagram on the right shows two different methods or syntax for writing CSS code. The first syntax shows CSS applies as a rule set, while the second shows it's written as an inline style. Two different methods of writing CSS may seem a bit intimidating at first, but it's not as bad as it looks. Notice how both syntax contain a declaration. Declarations are the core of CSS. They apply a style to the selected element. Here, the P element has been selected in both syntax and it will be styled to display the text in blue. Understanding that the declarations used to style select element is key to learning how to style HTML document with CSS. The terms below explain each of the labels in the diagram on the right. Rule set terms. Selector, the beginning of the rule set used to target the element that will be styled. Declaration block, the code in between is including the curly braces that contains the CSS declaration. Declaration, the group name for a property and value pair that applies a style to the select element. Property, the first part of the declaration that signifies what visual characteristic of the element is to be modified. And value, the second part of the declaration that signifies the value of the property. Inline style terms. Opening tag, the start of an HTML element. This is the element that will be styled. Attribute, the style attribute is used to add CSS inline style to an HTML element. Declaration, the group name for property and value pair that applies a style to the select element. Property, the first part of the declaration that signifies what visual characteristics of the element is to be modified. Value, the second part of the declaration that signifies the value of the property. Don't worry about memorizing. You'll get acquainted with them more and more as the course progresses. Feel free to come back and use this exercise as reference later on. Inline style. Although CSS is a different language than HTML, it is possible to write CSS code directly within HTML code using inline styles. To style an HTML element, you can add the style attribute directly to the opening tag. After you add the attribute, you can set it equal to the CSS style you would like applied to the element. The code in the example above demonstrates how to use inline styling. The paragraph element has a style attribute within its opening tag. Next, the style attribute is set equal to color red, which will set the color of the paragraph text to red within the browser. If you would like to add more than one style with inline styles, simply keep adding to the style attribute. Make sure to end the styles with a semicolon. It's important to know that inline styles are a quickly way of directly styling an HTML element, but are rarely used when creating websites, but you may encounter circumstances where inline styling is necessary. So understanding how it works and recognizing it in HTML code is good knowledge to have. Soon you'll learn the proper way to add CSS code. Internal style sheet. As previously stated, inline styles are not the best way to style HTML elements. If you wanted to style, for example, multiple H1 elements, you would have to add inline styling to each element manually. In addition, you also have to maintain the HTML code when additional H1 elements are added. Fortunately, HTML allows you to write CSS code on its own dedicated section with the style element. Nested inside the head element, the CSS code inside the style element is often referred to as an internal style sheet. An internal style sheet has certain benefits and uses cases over inline styles, but once again, it's not best practice. We'll get there. Understanding how to use internal style sheets is nonetheless helpful knowledge to have. To create an internal style sheet, a style element must be placed inside the head element. After adding opening and closing style tags in the head section, you can begin writing CSS code. The CSS code in the example above, change the colors of all paragraph text to red and also change the size of the text to 20 pixels. Note how the syntax of the CSS code matches for the most part the syntax you use for inline styling. The main difference is that you can specify which elements to apply the styling. External style sheet. Developers avoid mixing code by storing HTML CSS code in separate files. HTML file contains only HTML code and CSS contain only CSS code. Linking the CSS file. We have successfully separated structure HTML from styling CSS, but the web page still looks bland. Why? When HTML and CSS code are in separate files, the files must be linked. Otherwise, the HTML file won't be able to locate the CSS code, and the styling will not be applied. You can use the link element to link HTML and CSS file together. The link element must be placed within the head of the HTML file. It is a self-closing tag and requires the following attributes: href and rel. So here's an example. Link href, the link and rel style sheet. Href, like the anchor element, the value of the attribute must be the address or path to a CSS file. Rel, this attribute describes the relationship between HTML file and the CSS file. Because you're linking to a style sheet, the value should be set to style sheet. Review. The basic anatomy of CSS syntax written for both inline styles and style sheets. Some commonly used CSS terms such as rule set, selector, and declaration. CSS inline styles can be written inside the opening tag using the style attribute. Inline style can be used to style HTML, but it's not the best practice. An internal style sheet is written using the style element inside the head element of an HTML file. Internal style sheets can be used to style HTML, but are also not the best practice. An external style sheet separates CSS code from HTML by using the .css file extension. External style sheets are the best approach when it comes to using HTML and CSS. External style sheets are linked to HTML using the link element.